Welcome to another edition of the Science of Happier Work. My name is Jackson Kirchis. I'm a managing partner at Happiness Means Business, which is our corporate private sector arm, and Warrior Leader Training, which is our military and first responder training. And what both of those organizations have in common, and what I'm doing passionate about, is really applying a science-based tools for happiness and well-being to improve organizational outcomes. So these can mean things from retention to sales to the military, like mental health, recruiting and retention. All these things really, if we take a psychological lens and look at them through the social sciences around human flourishing, often we can better understand how to get more out of our people and more about our organizations. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about cohesion. Okay. And now this is really a decisive factor in performance, but also happiness at work. Because maybe, unfortunately, you've been in a situation where you're like, I don't really love this team I'm on, or maybe you don't have a very great relationship with your manager or the people around you. And as you may have experienced, that tends to be not a very happy making work environment, right? So when we talk about cohesion, I sometimes think of it as the who. In our comprehensive model of happiness and well-being at work, we sometimes talk about who, why, how, and what. So you have what is kind of the logistics, even things like your health, but also the role and compensation and all of the kind of tangible pieces. The how is all about engagement and motivation. The why is your sense of purpose and values and connection to the work. And the who is a very important piece of, well, what is the dynamic like in terms of the relationships? And cohesion means that you have good relationships, you have trust, you have a sense of connection. And we'll break that down. So let me start by asking you 3 questions. Okay. So this is something I do in a lot of my seminars or trainings, and it's something you can kind of take away. And I challenge you to try this after this. And I think if you do it, you'll have a really neat experience. Is pick someone that maybe you don't know that well. Maybe you have a decent relationship with, a little bit of rapport. And what you do is you go through 3 questions. Okay. And if you do this after the fact, you'll see the power of this. But for now, you're just going to have to trust me. The first question is, what is your perfect day? So you would share that. The other person shares that. The second question, what is your greatest accomplishment? So you share, the other person shares. Third, when is the last time you cried in front of someone? You share, other person shares. And you're like, that last one's maybe a little out there. But again, if you try this, what you'll find, if you do this for 5 to 10 minutes, is people will have just incredible conversations. I've seen people like even tearing up, and they go like, this person was sitting across from me at this event randomly, but we feel like we've known each other for years. And the reason for that is because this series of questions is actually drawn from a larger set of questions, which is known as the Fast Friends Protocol. It's also been known as the 36 questions for intimacy, or the 36 questions for falling in love, because the study, or the kind of research behind this, I think is fascinating. A group of researchers tried to come up with a set of questions so they could bring 2 strangers together, have them talk through those questions, and by the end, they would be like really, really close, really tight, that kind of personal cohesion. And they, tested this, and I don't know, some of this is maybe, popular science and kind of fictionalized, but I think there's some truth to it, that several of the pairs that went through that exercise ended up getting married or dating down the line. And because, there's 36, I said these 3 questions follow that same progression. It's something called cascading mutual disclosures, which is a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is cascading. So it's kind of like tit for tat. One person shares, then you share, then you share, then you share. And it's mutually disclosing things that are kind of making you a little bit more vulnerable, right? It's kind of that slippery slope. You don't go up to someone and, walk up to the bar. Hey, man, nice to meet you. Yeah, that was a cool networking event. Hey, what's like the craziest, deepest, darkest secret you've ever had? Well, maybe that's a cool conversation starter, but typically not how I start my conversations. But you might start saying, oh, well, what do you do for work? Okay, that's very friendly, very safe. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, what do you do for fun? Okay, that's slightly more intimate and vulnerable. And then you start saying, oh, you have a girlfriend. Oh, well, what's her story? How'd you meet? So you're gradually getting a little bit more personal. And over time, this is how we make friends, right? And we're taking it and it makes it sound more complicated and scientific. But ultimately, this is the process. One person opens up a little bit, then the other person opens up a little bit, and then you open and open and open. And that's how you build connection and friendship and trust with another person. And so this protocol is meant to short circuit that a little bit. And that's a principle that can go into this. When we think about how do you create cohesion, is you're trying to create these instances of cascading mutual disclosure where you're just a little bit vulnerable, a little bit interested in the other person. And typically what happens subconsciously is reciprocation. That's a known psychological phenomenon. Is this other person says, "Oh yeah, oh well, yeah, thanks for asking me about you know, uh something that I'm really excited about coming up in my personal life. What are you excited about coming up in your personal life?" Right? And then you progress. And maybe you can even say, "Hey, I noticed you were a little bit down the other day or something. Is everything okay?" Right? Again, that's probably not something you would ask if you don't know the person, but once you've built up that rapport and that connection, you get that cascading intimacy. So that approach to sort of intentionally role modeling a little bit of vulnerability and bringing that degree of intention to your interactions is one way to facilitate cohesion. And if you're on a team or leading a team, right, it's creating some circumstances where people can share a little bit, whether it's something as simple as an icebreaker or you have a little bit more of a structured approach like these questions that kind of get people together and get them talking. So that's kind of teeing us up for today. What we're going to talk about for the next 10 to 15 minutes is a little bit more of the science of cohesion and some of the application. So why is this important first? Well, I talked about anecdotally, right? I think we've all been in environments where we don't really love or feel that great of a cohesion with the people around us. And oftentimes we're pretty miserable. That can be in work, but it can also be in sports or in certain relationships or certain people, right? Where you hang around them, you're like, "Oh, these people, I'm not a fan." So there's that anecdotal piece. When we think about collaboration and effectiveness, teamwork, of course, again, we sort of intuitively know, and there's certainly a lot of research that shows that organizations or groups that have a good, let's say, a good degree of collaboration and effectiveness and teamwork are going to be more effective. But this, I think, is the most interesting kind of granular data point we have. So Gallup, they are a research organization that does some of the best research out there on employee experience and just organizations in general. They've got hundreds, maybe thousands of companies, hundreds of thousands of employees they've surveyed, and they find an interesting pattern. So when they first started studying something called employee engagement, they would ask a question: "Do you have a best friend at work?" And a lot of companies do that and be like, "What's up with that? Why are you asking about that?" So now employee engagement, the thing they're studying, is a measure of interest and enthusiasm for one's work. So you can imagine when you have a lot of engagement at work, that means people are happy, but it also means they're going to be a whole lot more effective, right? Because it's measuring their interest, commitment, enthusiasm, and overall engagement, as the word implies, for their work. So it's an important thing to measure. But they ask these people, like I said, "Well, what, you have a best friend at work? Why are you asking me that?" Well, it turns out that people who say, "Yes, I have a best friend at work," are 7 times, 700%, 7 times more engaged than people who do not. So, one of the major leading predictors of engagement, so effectiveness in a sense, right? Because it's commitment, interest, enthusiasm for one's work. One of the leading predictors is connection. Do you have a best friend at work? Because I think naturally it goes without saying that if you have a best friend at work, you probably have higher levels of connectedness and cohesion throughout the team. So this is pretty fundamental uh, business impact of this as well. And in the military, they look at this and they talk about how this is necessary to have cohesion in order to support soldier mental health, as well as mission command, which is a certain style of leadership that is deployed in the military. And I'll share at the end of this a little case study from our consulting practice, even on the importance of this, how focusing on cohesion in management helps save a company on the order of probably $2 to $3 million. But first, let's talk about this. So how do we actually create this as individuals in our teams, but also as leaders in organizations? So 3 things you want to keep in mind. Trust. Okay. So cohesion is really about trust. it requires emotional intelligence, and it requires psychological safety. And now we'll explain each of those in turn. Trust, I won't go too far into because we kind of just explained it. It's really about shared experiences and a little bit of vulnerability. So you're, again, role modeling a little bit of vulnerability to create that intimacy. And it's important for you to do this as a leader. So I sometimes say when I'm speaking, don't listen to this podcast or this talk. And let's say you are a construction manager for a real estate development company. That's the last place I spoke at. Go into your meeting with your contractors, you got your foremen, you got your laborers there, and you come in Monday, say, hey, I know, okay, so we're working on building up the second floor of the building here. Okay, looks good. All right, by the way, we're just going to go around real quick, and each of you just share, when's the last time you cried in front of someone? Okay, we'll start with you, Mike. It's probably not going to go over very well, but you can role model just a little bit of vulnerability, just a little bit of intimacy. So you start that cascade where you really build a connection on a personal level. And that relates to this idea of creating shared experiences, right? The more time we spend together when our efforts and our kind of purpose are unified and directed towards something, generally that helps to bring people together. I'll get a really kind of silly example of this, but I think it'll make sense intuitively. Is if I just sat you down next to a total stranger, you're kind of, this is your face, you're face to face, just like this. And I just say, hey, be friends, become friends. What's going to happen? We're probably going to stare at the other person and be like, hey, how's your day? Like, this is kind of, it's just going to be awkward. But if I were to sit you two down instead of face to face, you're side to side. So you have shared attention on an external object. And I say, hey, can you two work on putting this puzzle together or painting this picture together or solving this business problem together? And you're probably going to say, yeah, well, maybe we could do this and start talking, right? That shared attention and shared experience often facilitates connection rather organically, as opposed to just saying, hey, be friends, be together. So those are the two pieces right there on trust, right? Shared experiences for people, which you can cultivate, right, intentionally, or you can just even do little things. Hey, get lunch together, grab coffee, take a coffee chat, whatever. And then role modeling a little bit of vulnerability, getting to connect slightly on a personal level, of course, to an appropriate degree. Okay, how about emotional intelligence, right? We said that's another key success factor here, right? In order to have a cohesive team that works well together and has a sense of connection, you need emotionally intelligent interactions. So emotional intelligence, if you think about IQ is your intellectual horsepower, EQ is your emotional insight, your emotional regulation, right? It's your ability, if intellectual is like, I'm really good at figuring things out, solving problems, and understanding information, processing information. EQ is, I'm really good at managing emotions. I'm really good at processing emotions, of understanding emotions, right? You're shifting the IQ to the EQ. And so when we think about emotional intelligence, right, it's that ability to first have awareness. So you can recognize your own emotional states, and then you can recognize the emotional states of others, so empathy. And then you have regulation. So you have recognition and regulation, also known as awareness and management. So the management or regulation piece is, okay, having realized what the emotion is that's going on in me or going on in others or going on between us, I can then regulate it or manage it skillfully. So I have self-control, I have anger management, emotional regulation, and then I'm able to influence the emotional states of others or groups in a way that is efficacious. So you can think of a quadrant almost, and I can't share my screen on this video podcast, but you can think of on this axis, you have awareness and management, or recognition and regulation. And then up here, you have self and other, right? So there's self-awareness, other awareness. There's self-management, other management in this emotional dimension. So now how do we cultivate this, right? Because it goes without saying that this emotional dimension of human interaction is obviously essential. If your boss is an asshole, you're probably not going to be very close with them or have a great working relationship. Same thing if you have one of your employees who, they're a great friend and they're really nice, but occasionally they just get super upset and they like fly off the handle. That can lead to some very unproductive interactions and damage those relationships and damage the cohesiveness of that group. So how do we manage it? So, like I said, first thing is awareness. So there are practices you can do to cultivate self-awareness. The most simple one being meditation. So you're practicing bringing your attention back again and again to the present moment. I sometimes do the hello meditation. This is something you can practice for 10 minutes every day, but also in the moment where you just kind of shift your gaze of your attention inward and just say hello to whatever arises. So I close my eyes and I hello anxiety or hello stress or oh hello thoughts, hello planning, whatever. But as you do that, it's a form of mental training, right? You're training your capacity to recognize your own internal states. And so that when a negative emotion comes up and you're really upset, instead of exploding, you can say, oh, I see that anger coming. And you react a little bit differently. And then same thing externally. That ability to remain present, to remain centered and attentive and mindful to the person in front of you is going to go a long way in recognizing their emotional states. Bring your full presence to that interaction. Say, oh, I can see this person's talking a certain way, or I can see by their expression or their energy that they're a little bit agitated or a little bit down or stressed, right? That's awareness. Then as I said, the second piece are tools for management. So how do you control or regulate your own emotions and the emotions of others? And of course, I'm kind of going through this quickly. I could talk about this for hours, and we do have trainings on this for a couple hours at least with the military. If you're thinking about regulating your own emotions, I recommend antidotes. Okay. So it's kind of like if you get bit by something poisonous, what happens? Well, they give you an antidote. So, same thing with negative or unhelpful emotions, is you can apply a mental or a physical antidote. So, I mean, really think about this. Like, what's the opposite of frustrated and stressed? Well, maybe it's thankful or hopeful. Okay. So, what would it be like mentally to be thankful or hopeful? So you can just literally start thinking about things you're grateful for. You can pull up a picture and be like, oh, I'm going to look at a picture of my family or my dog or this accomplishment I did. You can be hopeful, like what are 10 things I'm excited about and literally write them down, right? All of those things are mental antidotes where you're taking some sort of positive emotion and using it to push out the negative emotion. Same thing with physical. It's like if I was really feeling just grateful and peaceful and hopeful, how would I breathe, right? How would my body be? And you can probably even notice as I talk, right? I'm up here because I'm a little bit excited as I talk, but it's like gratitude. My palms can be up, my shoulders are relaxed. I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. And then hopeful, I can feel my voice change and my expression, like I'm getting a little bit excited. So those are two ways, okay? Regulating your physical body and regulating your mind or your mental body is how you can regulate the emotional state that you yourself are in. There's other things you can do. Breathing is a common one, right? If you want to increase your energy, increase your inhalation rate. So hyperventilating, right? Like, or if you want to calm down, sighing. It's a little bit of the interesting neuroscience that your rate of breathing is kind of a governor that affects the excitement of your nervous system. So, like I said, when you're cyclically hyperventilating or your breathing starts to quicken and you're taking in more air frequently, right? That's an arousal. And when you sigh it out, that's a down regulating effect, right? So, just right there, you can use your own body to modulate the activation of your nervous system. So that's a very complex way of saying that by controlling your body, you can control how you feel. And similarly, by directing your attention or your thoughts, you can shift your emotional state. And that is how you build emotional intelligence in yourself, right? And I'm not perfect at this. If you see me playing church league softball, you'll notice it, right? But I strike out. Well, I don't strike out in church league. That'd be really embarrassing. But, I hit a bad ground ball or fly out or something. And I'm like, I can feel that anger coming. And if I catch it though, I can say, oh, okay. And now I'm going to think about the fact that I'm out here having a good time with my friends. So I just applied a physical and mental antidote. And it does not work every time, but it's a start. So that's how you can manage that. And then when you think about bringing that to others, it's really, the same thing is mindful listening. Okay. Listening for their body, their emotions, their language, all of these different things that go into that interaction. and trying to move the interaction towards a more positive emotional context by modeling it yourself more than anything. There's a phrase that I love and I share often when I teach, that leaders bring the weather. When you think about the climate or the felt experience of an interaction or a group dynamic, it often starts with you as an individual and you as a leader. Because there's something called the emotional contagion, which suggests that even if you see it right now, if I start to get really like, I look mad versus if I'm like really chill and mellow, you subtly, subconsciously are going to feel slightly different and pick up on that. And that's because we have something called mirror neurons in the brain that regulate this. That, when I do a certain gesture or emotional expression, you mirror it a little bit and you pick up on it. So by controlling your physiology and your thoughts and attention, you can create a more positive, and it doesn't always have to be positive. It can be a more effective emotional context, right? Because if someone does something really, really out of pocket or bad, and you need to bring some negative emotional energy and anger, totally reasonable to do it in a controlled way. But you can generate that and shift the emotional context of that interaction. And ultimately, again, that's that other piece of emotional intelligence. So using this emotional dimension in the service of bringing people together. Okay, that's how you do that. And then the final pillar is psychological safety, which really refers to the feeling that an environment is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And that's a sort of academic way of saying you feel like you can speak up, right? Without the fear of looking stupid. You can ask a question, you can make a suggestion, you can say, hey, I'm not sure how to do something. It's an environment that feels safe. And I'm not talking about safe space, so to speak, the PC thing, nothing against that. But again, that's not what we're talking about here. You can still have high standards and high accountability. But with psychological safety, and if I were to make a mistake, instead of saying, oh, I better got to cover this up, or I can't let people know that I screwed up, or I'm unsure what to do, it's saying you may still have really, really high standards for performance. But I can say, hey, I know what's expected of me here, guys, but I'm just not sure how to do this, or I think I dropped the ball on something. What do you think? And so, how do you create that feeling, that dynamic? Well, it's really two things. This comes from the work of Harvard researcher Amy Edmondson. Says first, it should feel as though the work is a learning experience, a learning frame more than a problem to be solved. So again, there's, context is important here. If you hire a new mechanic and you're showing them how to change a battery in the truck, probably that is going to be more of a, hey, here's how we do it, right? But generally, when you're approaching projects or you're approaching the general operating tempo of the business, it's less right and wrong, problem solution, and more, hey, we're all learning together how to do this in the best way possible. So I don't know, in a finance department, obviously you're going to still have certain standards and requirements and all of that stuff, but the dynamic is a little less, hey, I'm the boss, I know how to do this, we just get it done the same way, and it's a little bit more, hey, I'm the boss, I have a plan for how to do this, but let's learn as we go through and approach it as what is really the optimal way to solve this problem, because there may be things that we aren't doing right yet or things that could be done better. So that's really how you create this dynamic, right? We're shifting to where it feels like a learning experiment. You're almost in the experiment of figuring out the best way to do the job or to do the business. And then relating closely to that is just role modeling curiosity by asking a lot of questions. Okay. Leaders who ask a lot of questions and they're really curious, almost by default create psychological safety because they're creating a container or spaciousness for people to open up and share thoughts and ask questions. And then finally, a really powerful tool is admitting your mistakes or suggesting that you could be fallible. You can imagine a CEO who comes into the board meeting or something and says, all right, here's the plan for this year. We're going to triple our earnings and we're going to expand into the Southwest market. And this is what we're going to do. And it's done. Versus a CEO who says, hey, this is my vision for expanding into the Southwest market and tripling our market share. And I've made mistakes before. I've done, in fact, 10 years ago, I did a market entry project for telecom industry in Chicago, and it didn't go over that well. So I'm open to feedback, but here's the plan. So again, you're just creating a little bit more of a context of psychological safety by admitting you don't have all the answers, because you don't, and admitting that you could or have made mistakes. And it makes you much more approachable, again, for people to share insights or ask questions or offer suggestions. So let's pause here. We just covered a lot. So that is really, though, what makes cohesion. You're creating an environment where people trust and care about one another by allowing or encouraging in subtle ways people to be vulnerable and develop personal connections and have shared experiences. You're bringing emotional intelligence, and you're making sure that the people in your organization communicate in emotionally intelligent ways where they're managing their own emotions and the emotional context to be conducive to building relationships, right? Because generally, while negative emotions like anger and frustration and even sadness or guilt often can play roles in some cases where they're really serious things, but generally speaking, negative emotional contexts damage relationships. And then finally, psychological safety. You're creating an environment where people feel like they can speak up without the fear of looking stupid, so they just stay silent. So, what can be the consequences of this? Well, of course, you're going to be happier at work if you deploy some of these tools. But I think a case study from our consulting practices is useful here. We worked with one of the nation's largest agricultural goods transporters, and they had some serious operational issues. And we identified that the key issue for them was safety. They just didn't really have a culture of like buy-in and commitment to safety, and it was costing them a lot of money, and they were going to maybe end up not able to be insured and have to dissolve the business. And so one of the main things we emphasized with them, of course, we did operation strategy and looked at the safety program and built some new processes. But one of the biggest thing we did was trying to focus on cohesion. So we taught a lot of their managers about emotional intelligence and about emotionally intelligent communication. How do you communicate in a way that builds connection and trust so that you can effectively influence people and get their buy-in? Because if I come in, I'm like, hey, where's your hard hat? Are you deaf? Is this amateur hour? Put that hat on. And if I tell you again, you're out of here. Not a very great way to build cohesion. But if I have an actual relationship with you and I can say, hey, Jeff, I'm coming by. I saw you didn't have the hard hat on. Look, at the end of the day, I want you to get home to your wife, Sarah, and your daughter, Jessica, without, losing an ear, without losing an eye, without a concussion. So, hey, can you do me a favor and keep the hat on? We want to really role model that for this new safety initiative we're doing. That's going to be a heck of a lot more effective, isn't it? For the long-term relationship, so the cohesiveness there and communication, but also even in the short term to get compliance. And so we worked a lot around emotional intelligence, psychological safety. We had some group activities, and we even had a weekly sort of town hall meeting, a steering meeting, so that we could keep the focus on safety, but also, again, create that environment where people can speak up, they can share things, they can get a little bit vulnerable, right? And just create that kind of cohesive atmosphere. And over the course of about a year, the results, last I checked, which was about a month ago, they cut their cost of claims by about 80% and saved $3 million for this, I'd say, medium-sized enterprise. So again, it's not that it was all cohesion, but that psychological factor of how people relate to one another, how they collaborate, how they function as teams, and ultimately the kind of dynamics of the interpersonal relationships were essential in this context for improving the operations of the business. So there you have it. That's a little bit about how to create cohesion. Again, you can implement this at a very small level with your peers, with your small team, all the way up to a very big organization. And as you do that, you're probably going to see a lot of improvements in terms of the outcomes that you and your teams are getting. And you're just going to be a whole lot happier at work. So there you have it. Every couple weeks to a month, we go live on this video podcast, sometimes have guests, sometimes do Q&A. Sometimes I'll just coach people or do consulting actually on the call. But really what it comes down to is trying to give practical tools for you as an individual to be your best at work, and for you as a leader to bring the best out of your people at work. And then that is part of our mission to help 1 million people be happier at work. So thanks again for listening or for watching. My name's Jackson Kirchis, and I'll see you next time.